Hello and welcome to the last topic in drugs acting on blood, that is the anticoagulants. So before discussing anticoagulants, let us first discuss something about coagulation pathway. We know that there is involvement of three different pathways in coagulation cascade. Those are intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway and the common pathway. Intrinsic pathway can be initiated in vivo and in vitro, that is inside the body and outside the body. In case of in vivo activation of intrinsic pathway, how it is activated? Actually, this is activated via different mediators released from activated neutrophils or activated platelets that can activate again factor 12A. So activation of factor 12A is very important for initiation of intrinsic pathway. And how can we initiate intrinsic pathway through the in vitro, that is outside the body, that is through surface contact. Factor 12A makes a surface contact with glass, thereby activating the factor 12A, that is activating the factor 12 to factor 12A. So important here is factor 12A in case of intrinsic pathway. While extrinsic pathway, here whenever the vessel wall is damaged, there will be release of tissue factor. Due to damage of vessel wall, there will be release of tissue factor. This tissue factor will combine with factor 7A. This is very important here. Factor 7A involvement is more. And this complex, the complex between tissue factor and factor 7A, will cause conversion or activation of factor 10 to factor 10A. And we can see here at this point both the intrinsic and extrinsic system converge and meet. So from this point common pathway starts. So what is the role of factor 10A? Factor 10A converts prothrombin to thrombin, that is factor 2 to factor 2A, and this thrombin has important role in the formation of fibrin, and this fibrin we know provides a mesh-like network around the clot, okay, leading to secondary hemostatic plug, leading to the formation of secondary hemostatic plug. So from this we can make out that what will be the final serine protease, that it will be the end product of both of these three pathways, is thrombin. Thrombin is the last serine protease, okay, that is generated with the help of stimulation of coagulation cascade. So thrombin has certain effects, certain functions in the body that we will see. But before going into that, let us discuss few more points about this coagulation cascade. Suppose there is deficiency of certain clotting factors. So what can be the clinical implications? There can be life-threatening bleeding in those patients. So you must be knowing that at least two different types of hemophilias. Those are hemophilia A and hemophilia B, where there are deficiencies of certain clotting factors. In case of hemophilia A, there is deficiency of factor 8, while in case of hemophilia B, there is deficiency of Christmas factor or factor 9. So again, this is important. Okay. So just remember that factor 7A is involved in extrinsic pathway, in initiation of extrinsic pathway, and factor 12 along with others, these factors are involved in intrinsic pathway. So if there is deficiency of these factors, then there can be prolongation of certain clotting times. We will see that. We will see those clotting times. Okay. So just putting those blood coagulation in words, that coagulation process generates thrombin, that we know, And what is the role of thrombin? That is factor 2A will convert fibrinogen to fibrin that will provide a mesh-like network around the clot, leading to the formation of secondary hemostatic plug. And again, they are of two. The blood coagulation can be activated via extrinsic system and intrinsic system. Extrinsic system, here there will be involvement of factor 7. This factor 7 activation will be done by tissue factor TF. Tissue factor, also called as thromboplastin. This tissue factor is released due to vessel wall injury. Okay. And in case of intrinsic system, that can be activated. Intrinsic system can be activated both in vivo and in vitro, and both will involve the activation of clotting factor 12. And at factor 10A, both the system will converge, that is the intrinsic and extrinsic system. This is called as common pathway, and this factor 10A, the main function will be to convert prothrombin to thrombin. So finally, the thrombin will be produced here that will have different functions in the body. See, body has some defense mechanism to prevent the blood to coagulate. Means if this coagulation process remains unchecked, then that can lead to disseminated intravascular coagulation. So to prevent that, body has some check mechanism. Those are called endogenous anticoagulants. Endogenous anticoagulants like protein C and S and antithrombin 3. So what is the role of protein C? Means how protein C and S acts as anticoagulant. They will cause neutralization or inactivation of factor 5 and factor 8. So this is important. Protein C and S will cause inactivation of factor 5 and factor 8, leading to its anticoagulant effect. So suppose there is a deficiency. The deficiency of protein C and S can be either acquired or congenital deficiency. In that condition, the chances of venous thrombosis will be more because they are endogenous anticoagulants. And we have one drug, especially this recombinant form of protein C, called as drotrecogene alpha. Drotrecogene alpha. Drotrecogene alpha. Actually, it was used previously for the treatment of severe sepsis, as it is said that protein C helps in the maintenance of the blood vessels. Okay, so there previously drotrecogene alpha was used as it used to decrease the mortality in severe sepsis, but nowadays, as there are more studies being done, and in those studies it has not been proved that much efficacious, so it is not used for that purpose. Now coming to antithrombin 3, how antithrombin 3 acts as anticoagulant. Antithrombin 3 chews up, or you can say neutralizes, certain serine proteases. Serine proteases means the certain activated clotting factors. They will neutralize certain serine proteases like 2A, 9A, 10A, 11A and 12A. So antithrombin 3 will cause inactivation of these activated clotting factors. Those are 2A, 9A, 10A, 11A and 12A. So what is the clinical significance? Actually, heparin and its derivatives increases the activity of antithrombin 3. Thereby they will inactivate these serine proteases. So that is important. So up to this much should be clear. So let us proceed to the different functions of thrombin. I told you the end product of parameters, that is coagulation in vitro, Here the important ones are APTT and PT. What is APTT? Activated partial thromboplastin time. So these are just clotting time. These are obtained by adding negatively charged phospholipids like kaolin and psilite that will activate factor 12. So in lab we are doing this by we are activating factor 12, and I told you factor 12 was involved in intrinsic or extrinsic pathway. It was involved in the stimulation of or activation of intrinsic pathway. So any deficiency or any abnormality in intrinsic pathway will cause prolongation of APTT, activated partial thromboplastin time. And we can see in this what is PT. PT is prothrombin time. Here we are using tissue factor. We are adding tissue factor to the recalcified plasma. The blood is clotting within 12 to 14 seconds. So from where the tissue factor was released? It was released due to vessel wall injury, and due to which it was activating which clotting factor? Factor 7 to factor 7A. Okay. So there was involvement of factor 7, and we know that tissue factor by activating factor 7A helps in stimulating coagulation through extrinsic pathway. So any deficiency of factor 7A will cause prolongation of PT, prothrombin time. So these we will discussing their significance when we will be discussing heparin and warfarin. Okay. So now different anticoagulants. Before that, there are certain anticoagulants that can be used outside the body. So they have in vitro effects. They are in vitro anticoagulants. These are basically the anticoagulants that are given to the person, that is their anticoagulant effect will be in the body, inside the body. But there are some in vitro anticoagulants. Among them, heparin. Heparin can behave as both in vitro and in vivo anticoagulant. That is important. Sodium citrate, that is also important. Sodium oxalate, again, those are also in vitro anticoagulants. And you also know EDTA by binding to calcium, that can also act as in vitro anticoagulant. So let us classify anticoagulants which are used as in vivo anticoagulants. So anticoagulants broadly are divided into two different types. One is parenteral and another one is oral. In oral we have three different forms, that is vitamin K inhibitors like warfarin. This you must have heard, warfarin is very common. So vitamin K inhibitors, warfarin, dicumarol and phenidine, and we have these are novel or newer oral anticoagulants. Those are factor 10A inhibitors and direct thrombin inhibitors. They are newer oral anticoagulants. In factor 10A inhibitors, we have rivaroxaban and apixaban. So rivaroxaban and apixaban, they are factor 10A inhibitors. You can see, just correlate X and X here. So rivaroxaban and apixaban is a factor 10A inhibitor. We have direct thrombin inhibitors like dabigatran and zimelagatran. Dabigatran and zimelagatran are the direct thrombin inhibitors. Now coming to parenteral forms, we have the important ones, or the classical ones you can say, are indirect thrombin inhibitors like low molecular weight heparin, example being enoxaparin and dalteparin. Unfractionated heparin, also called as high molecular weight heparin, and lastly fondaparinux. Actually they are all heparin derivatives. And again, coming to newer parenteral anticoagulants or novel parenteral anticoagulants, they are direct thrombin inhibitors like hirudin, lepuridine, argatroban, and bivaluridine. So we can see here that direct thrombin inhibitors can be, there are two types of direct thrombin inhibitors, one which can be given orally and another which can be given parenterally. So the classification is very important. Now let us discuss heparin in detail. What is heparin? It is a mixture of polysaccharides. So what is it? Carbohydrate, fat or protein? So it is a carbohydrate as it is a mixture of polysaccharide. I have already told you it has high molecular weight and it is the strongest organic acid present in the body. And where it is stored? It is stored in the mast cells along with histamine. It is stored in the mast cells. So mechanism of action, actually heparin itself does not has any enzymatic activity. It by itself cannot inactivate clotting factors. But what it will do, it will cause increased activity of antithrombin 3. Antithrombin 3 is an endogenous anticoagulant. So it will it will catalyze the binding of antithrombin 3. It will increase the activity of antithrombin 3. And what is the activity of antithrombin 3? To inactivate or to neutralize the certain clotting factors that are already present in the blood in their active form, like factor 2A, 9A, 10A, 11A and 12A. By this mechanism, heparin will cause its anticoagulant effect. We will see again the mechanism of action in detail. We will just contrast the mechanism of action of heparin versus low molecular weight heparin versus fondaparinux. Another mechanism is that another action you can say is that heparin inhibits platelet aggregation. So by inhibiting platelet aggregation, heparin can increase the bleeding time. And heparin also helps in clearing of lipemic plasma. That is, heparin when given can increase the activity of lipoprotein lipase. Heparin increases the activity of lipoprotein lipase, leading to breakdown of fat. Okay, so this is important, but this clearing of lipemic plasma, this actually requires a subtherapeutic dose, that is the dose required to produce anticoagulant effect, and the lipemic clearing effect of heparin, the dose required to produce this lipemic clearing effect of heparin is much low as compared to its anticoagulant dose. See, overall, most of the conditions where we will be using anticoagulant, parenteral anticoagulant, we will be preferring low molecular weight heparin as compared to heparin. But only in one condition, unfractioned heparin or high molecular weight heparin is preferred over low molecular weight heparin if the patient is having renal dysfunction. So unfractioned heparin is preferred over low molecular weight heparin in case of chronic kidney disease when GFR is less than 30 ml per minute. Okay, now what can be the different adverse effects of heparin? Before going into the adverse effect, indications we have not mentioned. So let us see what can be the indications. Heparin can be used as an anticoagulant in the treatment of deep vein thrombosis. Okay, deep vein thrombosis, in prevention of deep vein thrombosis, that is as a prophylactic drug also. Heparin can also be used in the treatment of pulmonary embolism. This is again important. So in thrombotic disorders, we can use heparin as anticoagulant. And what can be the route of administration? The route of administration of heparin can be either subcutaneous or intravenous. Okay, subcutaneous or intravenous. In case of subcutaneous, the dose is the heparin is always given in units. So in case of subcutaneous, 5,000 units, 5,000 units per day. Okay, so this is the subcutaneous prophylactic dose of subcutaneous prophylactic dose of heparin. While case of subcutaneous therapeutic dose of heparin, that will be 35,000 units per day. Okay, so subcutaneous therapeutic dose of heparin is 35,000 units per day. While I told you heparin can also be given intravenously, so in case of deep vein thrombosis, we start with a fixed bolus injection of 5,000 units. Okay, and that is followed by 800 to 1600 units per hour, which is delivered by infusion pumps. So in case of deep vein thrombosis, you have to start with a fixed bolus dose of 5,000 unit, that is intravenous injection 5,000 unit, which is followed by 800 to 1600 units per hour through infusion pump. Okay, now which route of administration we cannot use heparin for which route of administration, that is we cannot use heparin orally because it is not absorbed, and we cannot use heparin intramuscularly. Why? Because using heparin intramuscularly can lead to the formation of hematoma. So there is a risk of hematoma. We should never use heparin intramuscularly. Now I've already told you how can we monitor the response of heparin, which clotting test we will be using, as it is inactivating factor 12. So we can go for measuring APTT, and it is said that we should keep APTT between 1.5 to 2.5 times the control. APTT should be between 1.5 to 2.5 times the control. So this is the target therapeutic APTT, that is it should be between 1.5 to 2.5. So regarding adverse effects, so what can be the adverse effects of heparin therapy? As evident, it can lead to bleeding. Heparin can also lead to osteoporosis, and one important adverse effect, this we will be discussing in detail, that is heparin induced thrombocytopenia. So it is a type 3 hypersensitivity reaction that we will be discussing. Heparin can also cause alopecia and hyperkalemia. How heparin can cause hyperkalemia is that heparin decreases the synthesis of aldosterone, and we know that aldosterone is responsible for or causes sodium retention and potassium and hydrogen excretion. So if there are low levels of aldosterone, there will be potassium retention leading to hyperkalemia. In fact, it is said that if you are giving heparin for more than 1 week, one has to check the serum plasma concentration of potassium, okay, to prevent hyperkalemia. Now let us discuss the mechanism of action of different heparin derivatives in detail. Okay, so let us first discuss how heparin is able to inhibit factor 10A and thrombin, that is factor 2A. This is important because this will differentiate between the mechanism of actions of heparin versus fondaparinux versus low molecular weight heparin. So here we can see that heparin is a large molecule. It has this much of long arm, you can say. So it is a large molecule, and heparin binds to antithrombin 3. Heparin binds to antithrombin 3 via pentasaccharide sequence. Via pentasaccharide sequence, it binds to antithrombin 3. As soon as heparin binds to antithrombin 3, there will be conformational change in antithrombin 3. There will be conformational change in antithrombin 3. Actually, what it means that this site which is present in antithrombin 3 will become more receptive for factor 10A to bind to this site. Okay, so there will be conformational change, thereby leading to more binding of factor 10A to antithrombin 3, and we know the function of antithrombin 3. It will chew this factor 10A, it will inactivate this factor 10A. By this we can explain the how factor 10A is being inhibited by heparin. Now coming to this, how factor 2A is being inhibited by heparin. So to inhibit thrombin, heparin should bind through its long arm. Heparin should bind to antithrombin and thrombin simultaneously. So there should be bridging. There should be bridging of antithrombin and thrombin by the heparin molecules, and heparin molecules are long enough or large enough to do so. We will see in case of other two heparin derivatives, although they have this pentasaccharide sequence, thereby by binding through the pentasaccharide sequence to antithrombin 3, they are able to inactivate factor 10A, but they are not long enough molecules as compared to heparin, due to which they failed to bind to, you can say this, to bind to thrombin. So they will not be able to inhibit the thrombin activity. Factor 2A activity or factor 2A is not inhibited by low molecular weight heparin, and this is actually fondaparinux. Fondaparinux is a synthetic pentasaccharide. So both of these this fondaparinux and low molecular weight heparin have will not have activity against factor 2A. So least activity will be in pentasaccharide as compared to low molecular weight heparin, and maximum activity against factor 2A will be in heparin. So this differentiates between the mechanism of actions of heparin derivatives. Now coming to one term, that is heparin resistance. There is resistance to heparin, and it is of two types: pseudo resistance and true resistance. So let us first define what is heparin resistance. Heparin resistance, here the patient fails to achieve a therapeutic APTT, that is 1.5 to 2.5, with a dose of heparin dose of more than 35,000 units, more than equal to 35,000 units per day. That fails to achieve a therapeutic APTT. Even if we are using a heparin dose of 35,000 units or more per day, even that much high dose is not able to produce a therapeutic APTT level. And as we can see, there are two types of heparin resistance. One is pseudo resistance. In pseudo resistance, the level of anti-factor 10A is normal. The level of anti-factor 10A is normal, while the level of APTT is reduced. So the cause can be before initiating the heparin, the patient was having shorter APTT than the control value. This can be the one of the cause of pseudo resistance. So here what we have to do, we should not do any dose adjustment because anti-factor 10A level is normal. Okay, so we should not worry about pseudo resistance. The worrying factor is true resistance. So here what is there? Both the levels of anti-factor 10A and APTT are reduced. So in this case, the cause can be the patient can have severe deficiency of antithrombin 3. So if there is severe deficiency of antithrombin 3, then we can replace by giving antithrombin concentrate. And also here we should increase the dose of heparin until a therapeutic APTT or anti-factor 10A level is achieved. So this is important. You have to differentiate between true heparin resistance and pseudo heparin resistance. Now coming to low molecular weight heparin preparations like enoxaparin, dalteparin and tinzaparin. They are actually preferred over unfractioned heparin because they have predictable effects. How predictable? Because they follow first order kinetics, and we know that in first order kinetics half-life is constant along with clearance, so we can predict the effects of low molecular weight heparin as it follows the first order kinetics. And also they have long half-life. Long half-life means less frequent dosing, that is more compliance, and we can give these preparations once or twice a day. And also there is no need of monitoring in case of low molecular weight heparins. Why? Because APTT is not prolonged by these agents, so no monitoring is routinely required. So there are certain specific conditions where we can monitor, or we should go for monitoring in case of low molecular weight heparin. And here, if it requires monitoring, we should go for anti-factor 10A assay. We should monitor low molecular weight heparin therapy only in certain conditions, and there the parameter which we will be using will be anti-factor 10A assay. And what are the conditions? Suppose the patient has morbid obesity, is a pregnant woman, or in case of children also we can go for monitoring of enoxaparin. And also if the patient is having mild renal dysfunction, because in renal dysfunction there will be accumulation of enoxaparin or low molecular weight heparins that can lead to bleeding. Okay. And regarding this again, comparison between low molecular weight heparin, why low molecular weight heparin is preferred over heparin. They are more convenient to use because patient, if trained, can take the drug at home also. Okay, because we are giving mainly via subcutaneous route. And one more thing, the dose in case of low molecular weight heparin is in milligrams, while in case of heparin we know it is in units. So here the dosing is more convenient, you can say. Okay. And also low molecular weight heparin is associated with lower risks of osteoporosis, heparin induced thrombocytopenia, although it can be seen here, but the risk is very less as compared to heparin. Only in one condition we will be preferring unfractioned heparin if the patient is having severe renal failure or chronic kidney disease where GFR is less than 30 ml per minute per 1.73 meter square. So if the GFR is less than 30, then there we will not be giving low molecular weight heparin due to the risk of bleeding as it is excreted by the kidneys. So there we will be preferring unfractionated heparin. Now fondaparinux, we already know it is a synthetic pentasaccharide, and it is also indicated for the treatment of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia for thromboprophylaxis in patients undergoing hip or knee surgery and for initial therapy of patients with deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary embolism. Only contraindication here will be the patient weight should not be less than 50 kg. The patients who are undergoing hip or knee surgery, their weight should be more than 50 kg. Then only we can give fondaparinux. And also in acute coronary syndrome, here also we can use fondaparinux. Now coming to heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. So this is very important. So here the platelet count, as the name suggests, thrombocytopenia. Here platelet count is less than 1,50,000 per ml, or there is a decrease, 50% decrease from the pre-treatment value. So why this is occurring? Actually, regarding its pathophysiology, there is release of platelet factor 4. By heparin, there is release of platelet factor 4, and this platelet factor 4 can bind with circulating platelets and causing its damage, circulating platelets and causing its destruction, leading to thrombocytopenia. And also they can bind to there are antibodies that can bind to platelet factor 4, which is present in vascular endothelium and can cause vascular endothelial injury, leading to increased thrombosis, and chances of DIC will be increased. So it can lead to thrombosis and also it can lead to thrombocytopenia. So in heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, there are antibodies that are directed against platelet factor 4, okay, which leads to thrombocytopenia and increased chances of thrombosis. HIT is more common in women and in surgical patients as compared to medical patients. So in surgical patients and in women it is more common, and it occurs after few days of initiation of therapy with heparin. That is, after 5 to 10 days of therapy with heparin, HIT can be there. In fact, it is so severe in certain patients that it can lead to limb amputation. It can lead to limb amputation. Before the development of thrombocytopenia, there can be thrombotic complications which can lead to limb amputation. We have seen that how it can cause thrombosis, and due to this it can lead to limb amputation. Especially if the patient is if a patient of HIT is being managed on warfarin, there the chances of limb amputation is much more. So how the patient can present? The patient can present with skin lesions, venous thromboembolism, and adrenal hemorrhage. So what is the treatment? How can you treat this? First, stop the offending agent. So it is more common in heparin, so just stop giving heparin. And it is also, there is cross reactivity with low molecular weight heparin. There also you have to stop giving low molecular weight heparin. It is said that heparin of bovine origin has much more chance of inducing HIT, heparin induced thrombocytopenia, as compared to porcine origin heparin. Now you have to, after stopping the offending drug, you have to give alternative anticoagulant. You have to use alternative anticoagulant, like they are basically thrombin inhibitors, like direct thrombin inhibitors like bivalirudin and argatroban. Argatroban and bivalirudin. Fondaparinux can also be used because it has not been shown to induce HIT, but the drug of choice will be argatroban. So this is the drug of choice for heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. HIT is a type 3 hypersensitivity reaction, as there is there are circulating immune complexes seen here. Okay, so this is important. Nowadays we have novel or newer parenteral anticoagulants, especially these direct thrombin inhibitors. We have direct thrombin inhibitors which are given parenterally, which are given parenterally, like argatroban, hirudin, bivalirudin. Okay, so these are the agents that are direct thrombin inhibitors. They will directly inactivate factor 2A, and there is no need of antithrombin 3 here. They will not interact with antithrombin 3. They will directly go and inactivate factor 2A. They are in fact the drug of choice for the treatment of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Lepidolin is a recombinant hirudin that binds irreversibly to both the fibrin binding and catalytic sites of thrombin. So they bind irreversibly to thrombin and are used in thromboembolic disorders that we know. All direct thrombin inhibitors that are parenterally given are excreted by kidney except argatroban. So in renal disease, we can use argatroban there as anticoagulant, and all can prolong APTT, but we usually do not monitor the effect of DTI through APTT, but they can prolong APTT, while argatroban can additionally prolong INR and PT. INR is international normalized ratio, which has more importance in warfarin therapy, but argatroban can prolong INR levels also. Among all of these DTIs, bivalirudin has the shortest half-life, and bivalirudin is used with aspirin, is combined with aspirin in the treatment of unstable angina who are undergoing percutaneous transluminal coronary angioplasty. A patient of unstable angina who is supposed to undergo PTCA, that is a type of surgery, where there is increased risk of endothelial injury due to the procedure that can activate thrombosis, platelet activation and aggregation. So you have to cover that part with aspirin. So this finishes parenteral anticoagulants, and in next class we will discuss about oral anticoagulants.